Hey guys, today we're going to remake Sign of Life by Motionless in White, and it's going to sound like this. I've had a lot of requests for Motionless in White, so today we're finally doing it. We're going to break it all down. How do they get those industrial, horror-inspired synth sounds? What kind of production magic is going on with their guitar tones? And how do we find the right balance between sounding digital and sounding human to find that sweet spot to give our track that Motionless in White sound? So I want to start by exploring some of the awesome synth sounds going on in the intro, but to do that, let's just quickly lay down the guitar, bass, and drums for the intro so that it kind of sounds like the song and we can hear what we're working with in a mix. So we'll break down all of these sounds in a little bit, but a little flam on the snare here. We just want to lay something down so we can hear how the synths behave in the mix. Choke that last crash. Ba-bum, ba-bada. Let's quickly lay down the riff for the intro too. It's just a low C and then jumps up 2 octaves like this. That's the left, let's put it on the right. We'll break down that tone soon, but let's just finish off this kind of rough intro with this nasty bass guitar tone. Okay, so now we have the intro kind of roughly laid down. I want to focus on these synth sounds. Firstly, the one that's like... You know the sound I mean, that kind of high horror-inspired synth sound. So what's going on with that synth sound? Why does it give us that motionless vibe? Well, there are a few key elements that most Motionless in White synth sounds tend to share, and the first one being that Motionless really love a sawtooth synth wave. So I'm going to load up Vital Synth. You could use any kind of synth for this, and I do have my own preset right here, which we'll get to in a minute, but that's a bit complicated and might be confusing, so I want to show you from scratch how I make a motionless kind of sound in Vital. So let's just program in. This is just on the initial setting. It's going to sound terrible. So it's going to start on our root note of G. That's not the sound we want. But bear with me, in a second, this is going to sound super Motionless in White. Okay, so here is the kind of quick and simpler way for turning this into a Motionless in White synth sound. So the first thing that I always do is start with a sawtooth wave, which the initial preset in Vital is a sawtooth, so that's already done for us, and then I pitch them an octave apart. Sometimes I'll even have a third oscillator and bring it another octave, you know, maybe a further one up. But for this, we'll keep it simple. So we've just got that high octave on top, and that's going to give us a bigger sound. It's going to make it sound fuller. And Motionless always have really full synth sounds, so that is the first thing. And the next step is another thing to make it sound bigger and fuller. Motionless love detuning. Let's add a lot of voices here. And let's detune the oscillators a little bit from each other. So the multiple voices is basically like a chorus effect. We're just making it so that instead of one synth, we get all of these slightly different tuned waves coming across. Already that's starting to sound very motionless. Now we... Yep, can even add a little bit of chorus if we want to take that detuning further. And of course, the next important step is distortion. Let's go for the hard clip. Let's put it all the way up. Yeah, just filter out that very top end. And you know what? Maybe let's take it all up another octave. Okay, so that's a very quick example, but you get the idea. We just want to make it big and wide, multiple octaves, multiple voices, so it's very wide and very stereo, and then hard distortion, maybe just cutting off that super harsh top end. Maybe filter out the lows a little bit. You know, shape it a little bit with EQ. And that's basically the formula for a motionless synth lead. Let's just drag this onto the intro track I've made and delete that. So here is my preset that I've made, which is essentially the same thing. Like, these look kind of scary if you don't know synths, but if I roll these back, it's just a bunch of synth waves. I'm just kind of playing with them to get a different sound. Covering multiple octaves, using a lot of voices, just like you saw. And then for this sound, I've added some delay and reverb. So we just get that kind of dreamy sound. In a really full-on heavy section, they wouldn't do this, but because the intro's more sparse, the synth can kind of dance around more without clouding up the mix here. And you can see with the envelope, I've brought that down. So we've just got a pretty stabby attack because, you know, this doesn't want to be da da da. It wants to be wah wah. It's kind of like a fluttery, you know, kind of quick little note with that reverb tail. If you guys want a real deep dive on this synth stuff, by the way, let me know below because I'm thinking about doing a Mick Gordon focused video. So if that's something you'd want to see, definitely let me know and I'll make it. So from my preset I made, I think this synth sound is almost there, but there's a couple more things it needs before it sounds just like what we're hearing in the track. And I think the first one is that I think it needs to glide a bit between notes. If you listen to the original, there is kind of this, let me turn on the glide here, and I'll just turn it up further than we want it so you can really hear what it's doing. Obviously that's too much, but somewhere around there, we want to hear that kind of wah, wah, wah. The only other thing I want to do from this is just make it a little bit more uneasy sounding with some vibrato. This is like a textbook Motionless in White thing, textbook horror music kind of thing. Like if you want something to sound like horror, put a vibrato on it. Just don't put that much on it. This is a Korn trick. Like Korn definitely did this first, but on the guitar. Motionless, I would say, the kings of doing this on a synth. If you go too far with it, it sounds stupid, but if you get it in that sweet spot, it just unsettles the sound and makes you feel like, ah, geez, something's not right. All right, now I'm going to take this audio and put it on this second intro track you can see, which is just a simplified version of the first one. So I turned off the third oscillator, turned off all the distortion and reverb and delay. And this one's just handling the higher frequencies. You can see these are both up 24 semitones, 2 octaves. So we get this sound. And the reason for that one is because I am hearing the distortion. You know, we needed that hard distortion in the first synth sound. That's definitely there in the track, but I can also hear a second layer that's kind of this clean, very like pronounced top end sound that's got this kind of wow, wow, wow. And you can see here the only other thing I've done with this sound is I've linked this LFO to this filter. So if you watch this and you watch this. So I've basically drawn in a nice curve here so that this is telling this filter to just pull down that top end and give us kind of, if you're a guitarist, this is basically like we've made our own wah pedal. Can really hear it working if I pull it down, but we only want a little bit of that just to really make sure that the listener gets that wah, wah, wah kind of effect, because that just really helps this sound feel more alive. You don't want it to be static. You want to hear it moving. You want to hear it bouncing around. So it's only a small detail, but it does help to elevate the mix a little bit. Okay, so that is our lead synth sound done. Now I want to focus on this other synth sound in the intro, which you can see I have a track here that I've just called Rob Zombie, because come on, this is like a Rob Zombie sound. He's obviously a big influence on Motionless, and his production was insane back in the day. So yeah, pretty sure they had Rob Zombie in mind when they designed this sound. Also, let me know below if you guys want a dedicated Rob Zombie video too. That would be a fun one. So this one kind of started in a similar way, except everything's in a nice low octave. And you can see I've mangled these waves, but it's basically just saws again. Like I messed with it too much to really fully explain right now, but you can basically get this sound with saws. And the important thing here is that it's just sustained. So we don't want that fluttery wow, wow, wow kind of sound like we had before. This needs to be a solid just a heavy distorted bass synth sound. Wants to be less punchy and more smooth. And as you can see here, I'm automating the filter with this random, which if you're not familiar with Vital, this basically just, you put it on whatever parameter you want in Vital and it will randomly affect it. So I've put it on this filter so that we get this. If you watch the filter, because this sound really dances around and it sounds like filters moving around. So that's why we're doing that. And that starts this sound off, but that's just the beginning. Let's just go in and program in the note. Obviously it's sticking out a little too much right now, so we need to take a few more steps to really give it that Rob Zombie stuttering kind of vibe. And the magic here is going to be basically a tremolo effect. I'm going to use the chopper in Cubase, which is basically like a slightly more complicated and aggressive tremolo effect. You can get the same kind of thing with a tremolo. And I'm going to use this square wave so we kind of get this on off. So So you can hear that really brings it closer to the sound we want, but there's one more step that's really going to transform this and give it that full-on Rob Zombie vibe. So again, we're talking about blurring the lines between human and digital here. This is purely a synth sound right now, and to be honest, I'm not 100% sure that this is even a synth in the song. I think it is, but it could be a guitar. It's got that distortion, kind of has a guitar-like quality, so what I'm going to do to kind of bridge the gap between synth and guitar is run this synth sound into a guitar cabinet. So we'll use SS11X, and I'm not using any of this stuff around here, just the first cabinet in here. There's a whole load to choose from, but listen with this turned off and then on, you'll hear how it just makes it really feel kind of like, is it a synth or is it a guitar? It really sets it in the place we want it in the mix. That's a big trick in general for using synths in metal. Like anytime a synth isn't sitting right in a metal mix, try treating it like a guitar, put a distortion or an amp or something on it and see if it brings it a little closer to what you want. And let's shape this a little more with EQ because we want to make sure that there's no low end in this sound. We don't want it to get boomy and it's very much just a mid-range sound. And let's maybe around 1K, 2K, try and find that kind of like noisy. Kind of scratchy frequency. I'd say right around 1.5K. And finally, let's put the auto penner and Cubase on it just to kind of have it darting left to right like a phaser. Okay, that's our intro done. Now let's get heavy. So we'll program in the drum beat and it's going to be very simple. It's just going to follow that guitar riff. You could leave the kick out here when the snare hits. We'll see. I'm going to say let's leave the kicks in. A human wouldn't usually do that, but a drum machine would, and I feel like this is another way we can kind of bridge that gap between human and mechanical. And it's just going to be straight crashes. Let's put some quiet ones in between. And again, not something I would usually do, because a drummer doesn't have enough arms to hit a snare and two crashes at the same time, but that sounds good to me. And the cymbals in this song are quite immersive, so we want to kind of have it on the left and the right. You know, if we hit crash 1, it's going to be over here in the headphones. Crash 2 is going to be over there, so something like that. Then we need this little roll on the kicks. Okay, so our drums sound like this. And I'm only going to quickly go over the drums because if you saw the Architects video a few weeks ago, this is a similar sound, so we're going to give it kind of similar treatment, but I am using a different kit. So for this one, I'm using the Mixwave Gojira kit because it just sounded a little closer to me, to the motionless sound, at least in the kicks and the cymbals. Starting with the kick, the first thing is just a noise gate to catch the tail. If you watch the channel, you know that by now. Next, an envelope shaper, again to catch the tail, and I used a multi-band one because it was specifically the low mids and the lows where I'm hearing the tail. That's getting really nice and punchy. It's definitely going to cut through a mix. But I want to get that low end a bit bigger. The low end in the kick in this song is absolutely massive. So let's focus on that. Cut the super low stuff and then, yeah. Really focusing on this 100 Hz. Let's make it nice and wide. Really boost all those frequencies. Yeah, that just makes our kick sound huge. Lose a little bit of that slap because it's just getting a tiny bit harsh, and some boxy mid-range that we don't want. Okay, so the snare, I am using the Gojira snare, but I struggled to get close to the snare with this kit, so I'm using the snare here from the Get Good Drums One Kit Wonder Metal, so kind of a franking kit going on, but sometimes layering is the best thing to do. So I'm just going to put this snare sample on every snare hit. And again, like the kick drum in this song, that snare is so heavy, like you can really feel the weight coming down of that stick on the snare. We're going to take the snare a little further in a minute, but let's just finish focusing on this Gojira kit. So next, the cymbals. So really quickly, because you've probably seen me do this on the channel, I've cut all of the low end. We don't want that. Cutting some washy unclear stuff and some really harsh ringing frequencies up here. And then just boosting that body in the cymbal around like 3K, where we get that noise, that energy that we want in the mix. I absolutely love these Gojira cymbals. Like, not a sponsored video, I I just think they sound so good. Okay, and before we move on from the drums, I'm going to do another trick you may have seen me do in the Architects video. So we're going to layer the U-Jam Berserk kit, because it's this very industrial dubstep sounding kit, to really make sure we get that half human, half digital kind of sound. So we want to just directly layer this with our main drums. And you could use any kind of kit for this kind of thing, as long as it's really punchy and powerful like this. Almost like a metal kit, but a digital version of it. Listen to that like top end of this kick, that kind of clicky sound. The kick in this song does have that. It's kind of like a real metal drum, and then really has this like dubsteppy digital sound as well. So we'll not use any cymbals. Let's just use the kick and the snare. And this not only is going to take that kick further, but listen to the weight of this snare. Like, we made our metal snare nice and big, but this just has some power behind it. Yeah, you can pull a pitch down on this and... yeah, I'm going to leave that all the way down. That's going to like fill out those frequencies in our snare that a metal snare would not do if we just boosted the EQ on it. Okay, this is only going to be a tiny little detail, but it's going to really give us the sound we need. So kind of sitting on top of the drums in the track, there's this really kind of sharp digital hi-hat sound, which is pretty much like an industrial metal staple going back to the 90s. Like, layer your big metal drum kit with some subtle little drum machine sound. So I'm going to use another U-Jam kit, the pop kit this time, for this hi-hat. You could use any kind of pop or hip-hop kit for this kind of thing. You just want a really, really sharp, stabby, crisp hi-hat sound. So this is just going to be straight eighth notes. So if we listen to that in the mix, it might seem like that doesn't even matter because it's such a tiny little thin texture, but let me hit play and then I'll mute the hi-hat and just listen how the energy drops. Like, that is really just keeping that energy on the top end. It really just brings the mix to life. So that's why this is a classic industrial trick that is still used today, because it elevates your mix without taking up any space in the mix. Okay, so before we get to that awesome guitar tone, which when we do, I have some really cool tricks for you on that. But before that, let's just lay down the bass. And I'm not gonna lie, the bass tone I'm gonna be using in this track is kind of a complicated one. So I don't wanna make this a 2-hour video and go too in depth. But if you really wanna dive deeper on things like the modern metal bass sound and everything else to do with modern metal, my modern metal pro course is gonna be dropping next month in April. So if you're watching these videos and you just want more, you just want to go deeper and really get a solid understanding of every single step of this process, definitely make sure you're subscribed so that you don't miss the updates that are coming with this course, as well as all of the awesome videos I have planned. So with that being said, I'll quickly track the bass and then we will just break it down without getting too nerdy. Oh man, I love this tone. Okay, so let's put this on my 3 tracks, and to quickly go over what's going on here, I'm splitting my bass guitar into 3 tracks. So we have a compressed DI where I've filtered out all the high end and we're just handling the lows. And then I'm blending that with 2 distortion tracks that are focused on the mid-range. One of them's using the JST Hellraiser bass to really get that clanky grit in the mid-range. And then I'm using a Cubase amp to just get more of a solid sound. There's a whole bunch of other stuff going on, but like I said, we don't want to get in too much depth. If you guys want to see more bass stuff on the channel, let me know. But the thing I really want to focus on now, because for me, this is probably the most impressive element of this production, is the guitar tone. So let's track the riff, then we'll focus on getting this tone perfect. The left, let's get the right. Motionless are like kings of writing simple but impactful riffs. Like, anytime I learn a motionless riff, I'm like, really? They're just hanging around on that open string, or like, you know, on the root note. It's like nearly entirely just hit here's a C, which people make jokes about and stuff, which I get, but this is kind of like production wizardry. Like, it's all about making that simple riff hit as hard as possible. Everything's going in the same direction. The kick drum is going... Everything's just all about the production. Like, the only instrument is the production. I kind of love that. So that's the main guitar tracks laid down, but I'm going to actually grab my PRS for a second for these harmonics. You'll see why in a second. And these are super quiet, so let's bring them up quite a bit so they kind of match what's going on here. So the reason I grabbed a different guitar for that is because this song is in drop G, and those harmonics, you could maybe find them like, you know, somewhere really random, but that is not like a random 2nd fret harmonic. You can hear in the track, it's a very clear 5th or 7th fret harmonic, which in this tuning, you're not going to find those notes. I looked everywhere. They're not in this tuning. So I think what the band must have done, because they were just in the studio and they didn't have to worry about playing it live, is they will have just tuned the guitar to the notes that they wanted and then just got a nice clear 5th fret harmonic, which is what we've done with that one. I think that one's in drop B flat. So yeah, kind of sneaky little bit of studio wizardry going on there. Okay, so for this guitar tone, here's where it gets interesting. So I'm using Archetype Nolly, just a solid amp for a standard modern metal tone. And it sounds great, but it just sounds a little bit weak to me. The mid-range in this tone needs to be super, super full, and it just starts sounding a bit washy with this amp when I turn that up a bit. So what I'm going to do is keep the amp but lose the cab. So we're just going to turn that off and only use the head. And for the cab, I want to show you this sick plugin I just got hold of, which again, this is not a sponsored video, just a really cool plugin that I like. So this is the Miko Reflex by ML Sound Lab. And if you're into impulse responses, this thing is like the coolest thing I've ever seen for impulses. Like, you can move the mic 360 and you can see what it's doing with the EQ. And I'm using this preset, Mick77. I don't know if that's Mick Thompson or Mick Gordon or what, but it sounds awesome to me. There's a lot more we can do with this plugin, but I'm happy with this preset. Let me show you with this turned off with the cab in here, and then we'll switch it and just listen to how that low mid-range really gets the power under it when we're using the other cab. Really gives us that mid-range power, and it tames the high end. Maybe it means we'll get a little bit more lost in the mix with this tone. But with some EQ and some other tricks, I think we can get this really close. So let's start with a bit of EQ. And even though we've boosted that mid-range, I feel like there is a bit of washy mid-range that we need to cut now. We'll just cut the lows again because we never want these in the guitar. And something like that. Let's just copy that EQ setting and put it on the right as well. So we used that cab preset to really make sure our source tone has that like power under it, and then just shaped it with EQ to make sure it's not getting washy, not getting unclear anywhere, not getting harsh on the high end. So now this is what we're working with. And that's sounding huge to me now, but it's still not 100% there. The guitar tone in this song is just huge. And honestly, all of Drew Fulk's productions, the guitar tone just sounds huge. And there's always this like quality to his guitars that I don't hear anywhere else. And what it is that his tones are so strong in the mid-range, but they're also really clear. And usually it's like you either get clarity or you get mid-range. You can't, you know, you've got to sacrifice something. Drew Fulk has a way of making his guitars super, super mid-rangey and really powerful in those high mids, but also like really, really clear, not muddy, not washy at all. So I have a really cool trick for this, and I don't know if this is what he does, no idea, but this is what I do to kind of get that effect of a huge high mid-range in my guitars without it getting washy and unclear. So the first thing we're doing is I have a guitar bus here so that we can just process both of those guitar tracks as one track. And what we're going to do is just pull up a multiband compression. Let me quickly just show you something with EQ. So what we want is more of like this kind of thing. But you can hear if we boost that with EQ, it just gets unclear. But if we cut those with EQ, our tone kind of disappears and sounds like Fear Factory or something, which is not what we want for this. So let's lose that EQ, bring up just a stock multiband in Cubase, and let's focus this third band on maybe 700 to 2000. And we're going to ignore the low end, the low mids, and the highs because the EQ isn't doing it. So what else can we do? What do you do when you want to make something more upfront in the mix? Compress it, right? So instead of boosting those frequencies, let's just squash them with some compression to hopefully bring that high mid-range more upfront without boosting those washy frequencies. So let me put the ratio, we don't want to touch any of these bands, and let's just slightly do something like this, and let's boost the volume. Not because we want to make it louder, this is not like an EQ boost, this is just kind of makeup gain, because we're compressing, which is going to squash these frequencies, so we want to find the right level to kind of make sure it's the same balance that it was before. You hear how that's so different to just the EQ moves we did? It's just bringing the tone alive in that high mid-range without it getting unclear. See, I'm giving you guys all the cheat codes today, like that takes our guitars way closer to the original track. So now we have this mix pretty much done. That's all the key elements of this track broken down and replicated. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I hope you picked up some good tricks from it. If you did, please hit the like as it really helps the channel, and subscribe if you don't want to miss all of the videos that I have on the way. I have some really cool things coming in the next few months that I really want you guys to see. If you made it this far, thanks so much for watching. See you in the next one.